Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. This is one of our Notes from the Field events, and today we're talking about educational resources to elevate student voice and identity. My name is Kimm Topping, and my pronouns are they, them, theirs, and I'm one of the Equity and Inclusion Fellows for the Harvard Graduate School of Education. Just wanted to start by thanking Cassandra and all of the Equity and Inclusion Fellows for putting together these events. We've had incredible conversations this week. And also want to mention that this event is happening in partnership with the Harvard Common Spaces. And so you can find out more about Harvard Common Spaces and their upcoming events at their website, which is commonspaces.harvard.edu. And they'll also be posting a recording of this event today. So I want to introduce Verónica from Lee & Low Books, who is an incredible advocate for student voice and identity in her work. And I'm going to give her a few minutes to just introduce herself and her story. I'll share more about my story, and then we'll be sharing a lot of resources with you and opening up for a Q&A after that.
Thank you, Kimm. Hi, everyone. My name is Verónica. I'm a Chilean educator. I was born and raised in Chile, but I've been living in New York for the last 5 years. And after teaching both in Chile and in the US, and always having a huge passion for children's literature, I found my perfect space at Lee & Low Books. I've been working there for around 3 years now, and now as the educational sales manager, my role is as an educator is to bring the books that everyone can feel identified with. Lee & Low is the largest public children's book publisher in the US that specializes in diversity. It's been going for 30 years. It started pretty much based on race. But now we know we're doing LGBTQ+, neurological diversity, physical diversity. So we just want everyone to feel represented through the books. So yeah, I mean, we work across the US. We work with other countries as well. And little by little and book by book, we try for everyone to feel more represented.
Great, and a little bit about my background. I'm a youth worker and educator by training. As a first generation college student, and I also identify with the LGBTQ+ community. And so all of those things have really informed the work that I do. And right now I do a lot of professional development trainings with teachers and also with students around LGBTQ+ inclusion. So I'll be adding a little bit there around how we can support LGBTQ+ students for our conversation today.
Awesome. Should we get going with the slides?
Yeah, let's check it out.
So how we plan this conversation with Kimm is to first give you some context to our discussion, because this presentation is about giving you guys resources, no matter where you are, resources to elevate your students and their identities. But we're not just going to hand you like a list, like, yes, at the end of this presentation, we will give you a link and you will see a list. But that's kind of like the easy part. I think we wanted more to like empower you and feel that every single one of you is playing a role in education, even if you're not in the education field. As Maisha Porter actually said in her session yesterday, was like, we're kind of going back to the good old-fashioned neighborhood where we actually need to ask people that are around us what we can offer. So in this context, especially today in COVID-19 and beyond, like, we're all gatekeepers. You don't have to belong to a curriculum developer. You don't have to be high up there in the pyramid of any district or state. So like hopefully all the statistics that we will share will empower you to become that and to be a part of the solution, which we are sure that you are. So just to give you a little bit of context, we thought it was important to have this census population estimate just to give like a general idea of the racial makeup of our country. The estimates throw that around 60% of our population in the US is white Caucasian. And as we go through the following slides, we really want you to remember the 60% because we'll see how things are shifted on what the actual makeup of the country is versus what we're seeing in representation. And now Kimm, go ahead.
Yeah, well, I think a couple interesting things about this is that, first of all, when we're looking at the census, folks might not be filling out the census for a number of reasons, thinking about fear and safety, if someone is undocumented, for example. So this really isn't a true reflection of our country. And then also projections show that in the next 10 years, white and Caucasian folks will not be in that majority percentage of the United States population. So these demographics are also shifting really rapidly. So just kind of taking all of that into consideration when we're looking at it is really important.
Yeah, no, definitely. So like take a mental picture of this slide and then let's go into the following slide. Now this slide, diversity in children's books, this is based on statistics compiled by the Cooperative Children's Book Center. This is, I mean, in my industry, I've seen it a lot of times, but if you haven't seen it and you're having like a shock, you're completely right to have a shock, because what this portrays is that children's books that were published in 2018, books published about Native, Latinx, Asian, African, all those characters combined, African American, Asian American, all those combined are less. There are less books about them than animals and other non-human creatures, and like by far, and that is not okay. There's like a problem with having like animal and non-human creatures because it's like a false, now this is me, it's a false like kind of like a pretense that everyone can feel identified. But like, newsflash, we're not rabbits. At the end of the day, we don't crawl under a tree and have a carrot with our brothers and sisters. And like, although there could be many books that are great, and I'm not saying that those books are not good, it's just like, if we want people to actually feel identified, this is why the illustrator of this graphic, David Huick, like used mirrors, and mirrors and windows are a very common term used in education. So you might as well be familiar with it, but if you're not, like, mirrors are resources where you see yourself in, and windows are resources that let you explore something or someone else. And it's important to have mirrors because if you don't have a mirror, like look at the face of the Native American boy at the, at the lower end of the spectrum of representation, like he can barely see his eye. Like you need to have resources where you can see yourself. So if you're thinking like, how can this be? Like, who is publishing these books? Lee and Low Books, as well as publishing books, we consider ourselves advocates and real activists. And we suspected that if this is what's coming out as books, like what is happening behind the scenes. So the data that I'm going to share now is kind of like of the publishing industry, but this is really an invitation to explore what's happening behind all across industries, because in the end, like it all trickles down to education. Like it will all trickle down to how kids are able to see themselves in different job positions. Like what am I going to look forward to going to college for? Why should I push it? Because if I can or can't see myself in the industry that I want to be in. So yeah, our suspicion was right. So in 2016, we launched the Diversity Baseline Survey. We invited everyone in publishing to be part of this survey. We focused on 4 different facets of diversity: race, gender, sexual orientation, and disability. And 34 publishing companies participated, 3 out of the big 5 participated, and 8 major review journals. And although the data was completely anonymous and we just wanted to showcase what the industry looked like, a lot of people chose not to participate. That said, the industry overall, those results showed that the publishing industry is 79% white, 78% cisgender women, 88% straight, and 92% non-disabled. Now, if we go back to the 60%, and I'm sure if we explored all the other like categories of the census, this is obviously not what our population looks like, and no wonder that the data of what is being published is what it is. So this really became like the go-to numbers of like, when are we discussing topics like who are the gatekeepers that are bringing educational resources out? What about cultural authenticity? Like, how can you make sure that a book is culturally responsive? Like, who is editing the book? If the book is about an African-American boy, who is editing the book? Like, how can we make sure that even the illustration of the hair is accurate and not just like a cartoon? So it's important to say, like, from the first launching of the Diversity Baseline Survey, the publishing of diverse books had a boom for a multiple amount of reasons. Like, we changed our precedent. The Me Too movement exploded. Black Panther came out, like The Hate U Give, Crazy Rich Asians, like there was a huge commercial value of publishing diverse books. So we thought, maybe if we launch it again in 2019, 2020, like maybe the industry has changed, maybe the gatekeepers have changed. So we decided to redo it. And in 2019, we had more than 150 companies participate. So that's 5 times as more. All the big 5 publishing companies participated, as well as literary agencies and university presses. And what that showed is that, some numbers did go up, but the inequalities persist. And, it keep in mind that there's a lot more participants in these results, and we also added more categories in which you could identify yourself with. So if you look at the totals, like the shift wasn't big, and there are also a lot of changes. Like people felt more comfortable in those 4 or 5 years. Like there was a lot of more space of identifying yourself with a different gender category or different sexual orientation, or saying, I have a disability. And disabilities, we can't just think about like physical disabilities. We need to think that almost half of the results of the survey were about mental health, and I think and how does that translate into the workspace. So inside this industry, I just want to dive deep into like 2 categories inside the publishing industry, just for like penny for your thoughts, we said. So, the most diverse in terms of disability were book reviewers. Actually, 81% said that they had some sort of disability. And this is a work from home friendly job. So, and now that every industry has gone into work from home, and we've proven that it works, like, isn't this a huge invitation to just go ahead and like open a lot of the roles that you're thinking of hiring to people that have a disability, because we can do a good job from home. And the most diverse groups in terms of race and sexual orientation were interns, which was like 51% white and 51% identified as straight and heterosexual. So what is happening? Why are they just staying as interns and not going into a full-term employee? Is this happening across the board? Like, we think that data, putting this out there and sharing this with you, is hopefully an invitation for you to navigate the data in your companies, in your industry, and be like, how can we make this more equal across the board? Because obviously that's not happening. So Kimm, do you want to add anything?
Yeah, well, I think it's just really big questions that we're all having right now about education in general. Is we're seeing that things are possible that were said were not possible before, right?
Yeah.
And now we know that they're possible. So can we, continue on this path of opening up opportunities for folks?
Yeah.
And I'm just remembering back too to when you first showed me this graph, I was really surprised the amount of cisgender women that was at 74 to, and the other graph was a little bit higher. And I think that's because I've had so many conversations with women who are interested in publishing their work, and they get negative feedback, or they're presented with all these challenges when they try to publish their work. And so I'm just really curious, and I wonder, like, if this was a more of a qualitative survey, what are some of the stories that could have come out of that?
Mm-hmm.
We would have heard from folks, like maybe they've gotten pushback, but ultimately they do get that opportunity. Just curious.
Well, that's a gap that you found, I mean, that's work to do, right? Like that's exactly what showing the data makes us do. Is like, oh, this is not showing this, or how can we share stories that are behind this industry. Like, it's really interesting to see that, women are not being helped by other women in this industry. So let's see where this takes us. I mean, there's power in numbers, and we'll keep showing more numbers, and this is still like an ongoing invitation, because in the end, this all trickles down to everyone's education process. And as well as, this industry, we also wanted to say, it's important to not only focus on different genders and different race and different orientation and disability. There are so many, like we were talking with Kimm yesterday, we're a very complex and intricate like grid of multiple identities and categories. So like, don't think that if you, like if you have an Asian student that you need to find like a character that is Asian. Like, no, maybe they both live in like an urban setting, or they both live in a rural setting, and they both have like a family structure that is similar, or maybe like find different connections that you can identify and elevate your students with, because it doesn't have to be what is like most obviously visible, or obviously because there's a lot that is invisible that you can identify yourself with. So yeah, one of the resources that I'm sharing here in this slide is like one of the things that we do in Lee and Low is to actually foster tough topics, because our kids grow up watching the news. We are surrounded by a, if this pandemic is not a tough topic, then what is? And we need to remember there's a lot of talk of like education during COVID-19, but we want to expand that to COVID and beyond, and like before COVID, because before this happened, people were experiencing homelessness, poverty, like family trauma, loss, death, like, and that was already important to foster in the classroom, and that's what all the trauma-informed resources were focusing on, and all that is being magnified by like unmeasurable quantities right now. So finding resources and fostering those trauma-informed resources are it's really important now. Like, it's really important to have the conversation. In, I think it was Dr. Hitchcock yesterday that was talking that they keep surveying their students right now in lockdown, and 20% of them have said that they have lost someone in this time. So how can you continue your education knowing that a fifth of them are grieving? Like, and that's just in the numbers. And so yeah, we think that this type of resources are important to share. Go ahead, Kimm.
Yeah, and I think just to circle back to your first point about students' identities being a very complex grid, I think this comes up too with LGBTQ plus students, where educators will think, okay, well, this student identifies with the community. Let's refer them to the Gender Sexuality Alliance. Let's get them a book that's focused on LGBTQ plus communities. And that's fantastic. And, you know, students are much more complex than that. There might be other things that they're interested in.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a really important point, I think, not to just focus on one aspect of who a student is. And that's really what we're getting at, is elevating their voices, asking them what they need from us.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's a really big challenge right now, is finding out what students need, especially when they're virtual or might not have access to virtual means. And I know you'll get to that in a little bit. But I also just want to talk a little bit more about LGBTQ plus resources. So the article on the bottom right of the screen, that was an article that came out from Harvard and usable knowledge that I had worked with them on, and really just, you know, highlighting what are some of the challenges that LGBTQ plus students are facing right now. Many students are in a home that is unaccepting or is unsafe for them, and they're disconnected from their networks at school. So their close friends, their teachers, their guidance counselors, people in their life that were really supportive are now distant from them. And so some of the things that educators can do is connect those students with virtual spaces if they have access to the internet. There's tons of online GSAs, gender sexuality alliances, right now that students can tap into. And also making sure that those students are connected with those people that make them feel safe and supported. So their friends and, you know, folks at school. And then also for teachers continuing to do their professional development. I know we were talking about the other day that it can maybe seem overwhelming if you're unfamiliar with a particular community. That's okay. You know, it's part of our job to really educate ourselves, use Google, talk to our friends, talk to people who really are familiar with the communities, and just keep learning all the time. I think that's part of our work, right? Is to keep educating ourselves.
And that is super aligned to what our invitation of this conversation, to like take action. Like, not because I'm Latina, I can only share Latino resources, I can only talk in Spanish. Like, I can learn of everything. We're constantly learning, and there's so many resources. And I think that people that say, like, if I wanted more information on like how to share an Asian resource, like there are so many people that are so passionate about that specific thing, like and that kind of goes into every category of any kind of like marginalized or diverse group. Like, there are people that really care and that will be very happy to help you share their resources the right way. So yeah, just ask. Again, we were talking yesterday, like I think humbleness is the key here, like just being humble and saying, I don't know much about this. Like maybe there's an expert out there. Like if I have the power of publishing a book, like there are so many experts and curricular experts on how to bring this into the classroom. So don't be afraid to ask and just, go ahead and do it.
Absolutely. Yeah. There's so many people and resources out there.
Yeah. And one of the other inequalities that we've seen a lot during this time, especially going into um, remote learning, is the access to the internet. So this map came up on my Twitter feed 2 days ago from someone in San Diego schools, and I just couldn't look away. Like I felt like I had to share it in this presentation because there's a lot of talk, like, what will remote learning look like? How long will it go? But this map is saying that like only the green parts of this map have broadband subscriptions. So like they feel comfortable joining everyone in multiple devices, joining different Zoom meetings, but if you don't have broadband subscription, like what is joining a Zoom? What is downloading a video? What is watching YouTubes and activities? Like that is not real. And we learned yesterday from all these district leaders that they are doing everything and anything to give them hotspots, to give something, but we've seen also in the news like families parked outside like a strip of stores because they're just trying to get a hold of like any free Wi-Fi that they can find. So as we move into a long-term distance learning, what do resources look like, and can we actually move into like all full digital collections, and who are we leaving out when we do that? So this is another penny for your thoughts, but California being one of the richest states in America, if this is the what it looks like let's think of the other 49 states and just kind of think where can we narrow that gap. So yeah, we with these slides, we just wanted to say that there is power in being counted, and that numbers can actually provide an accurate look at a problem, and we're all gatekeepers. Like if you are not familiar with the term gatekeeper, like it's actually who decides like what stays and what doesn't, what comes out and what doesn't. And as parents, as educators, in any role that we are, like we do have the power of deciding what comes in and comes out, what our kids see and what they don't, what our teachers see and what they don't. If you're watching and your partner is a teacher, like how can you support that person? And because then it all trickles down into the kids. And yeah, I mean, now I was telling Kimm yesterday, I feel like I will sound like the MTA subway here. Like if you see something, say something. But if you see something, do something. There is not any problem on like there's never going to be too much. Like when a good example is that very early on during COVID-19, I joined a webinar of what district leaders thought education would look like, and they were all saying, if we go remote, the concern would be that a Spanish speaking community will be really left out, because if we manage to get resources out there, like they would be more general education, and like all the English language learners with Spanish speaking parents, like they will be really left out. So then, I was like, I work in sales. Like I wasn't going to push sales in April. So I'm a Spanish teacher. Since I joined Leon, though, I've always been wanting to do a Spanish resource page, and I was like, okay, guys, this is time. And we created the first, only Spanish, only read aloud, Spanish only teacher guides, and that's like what was like my grain of salt in this. And like we can all. You don't have to belong to a huge company. You don't have to have a lot of resources. If you're lucky enough that you're comfortable at home and a little bit, you have a little bit extra time and you have a printer, for example, like join a Facebook group or join your buildings group or something and ask, hey, you can send a private message. I have a printer. Do you need anything printed? Do you need anything downloaded? Give me a thumb drive. I'll help you. Like, let's go back to that called community lab, because I think that if we all find gaps in our data surrounding us, and we all find gaps in the numbers surrounding us, that's how we get through this.
Mm-hmm.
So now I'll stop the sharing of the slides, and then we'll come back at the end and we'll share our contact information and the resource link.
Yeah, so if anyone has questions, feel free to drop them in the Q&A on the bottom of the screen, and we'll read them out for you. But in the meantime, I was just thinking, Veronica, about our conversations when you were telling me about how part of your job is responding to people's questions about the books that Lee and Lo is putting out there. I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about that in your role.
What sort of questions?
So you were telling me, you know, there's a book out there about police brutality, and you had questions from the community about how teachers and educators and maybe parents can use that book. Mm-hmm. So I was just curious if you could share any of those experiences.
Yeah, sure. So all of our books that we publish have like a free teaching resource guide. And when there is something that we know that teachers might not be comfortable bringing into the classroom, or they feel that they might not have the language, or as I said before, like there is so much pressure on what people will say now, that it's like, you know, I'm white, so I don't know how to talk about this, or like we give a lot of education in those teacher guides, and the literacy specialists like consult all sorts of specialists on the topic. So yeah, we do have a graphic novel. It's called I Am Alfonso Jones, and it is about police brutality. It is about an Afro-Latino boy in Harlem that gets shot on the second page. So I'm not ruining the book for you, but how to bring that into the classroom. And the teacher guide starts with, I think it's like 3 full pages of links and organizations and foundations that how to bring up Black Lives Matter into the room. Like, why is it important to foster this? Like, the kids in high school are not only not seeing, they're seeing this all the time. You need to foster a space because it's people like them that are suffering this. So like, you have to bring it in, and how to not be scared of bringing topics that are important to talk to into the classroom. And that obviously that's kind of like one of the hardest ones to bring in. But for anything that you might not be familiar, we try to get ahead of like that question, and on our teacher guides we have all sorts of resources that answer those questions. And if not, you can always we're answering emails all the time, especially our literacy specialists. But our marketing team is great on that. We have like different kind of our team is very diverse, so we're always answering questions for each other and making sure that it's the right thing to do and that it's culturally responsive.
It's so important because sometimes people need those one-on-one conversations to just help them get started, right? I'm seeing a question here. So there are many educators who are creating their own instructional materials for online learning. Do you have any suggestions for this new wave of curriculum developers?
Yeah, I think there is like a lot of power going on in many like educator groups that I participated in at least, of like asking and be like sharing resources. I think the best suggestion is like, don't feel like you need to reinvent the wheel every time, because we might easily get like overwhelmed with all the changes during this pandemic and be like, where do I even start? And there are a lot of materials out there that already did that, kickstarted that for you. So yeah, that's I think that's the best suggestion. Like, don't put that pressure on you, and count on your colleagues, because there's a lot of work being done. What do you think, Kimm?
That's a really good point. I think teachers have just been launched into this whole new world overnight, right? Like, they're expected overnight to pull everything together and move their curriculum to a completely new platform. And even as a student and as an educator, I've been feeling the pressure of being in a completely new learning environment. And I think there are so many resources out there already that you can pull from. So just like we were talking about earlier, when it comes to identity, there are people in your life that you can reach out to. So I think same thing here. It's just reaching out to folks who have already been doing the work and are experts at it. Yeah.
And we've had a lot of questions through this time of like, why diversity is important when, when the world is shut down and everyone is scared. And particularly, like, why are we talking about representations in books, like when it might not be as easy to access, and as we said before, like where everything is kind of shifting into digital collections. So yeah, I mean, again, I think it's important to answer that here, because it's important to understand that COVID is magnifying all these inequalities, and it's important to shine a light on it. And people are feeling more alone and scared, and less seen, and there's less interactions. And even for a student to go into the classroom and maybe like knowing that someone next to them is going through something similar, or going to the park and seeing their friends, like we're all getting that taken away from us. So putting resources in front of their screens, at least, that make them look like them, is huge.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I was so grateful to see the trauma resources that you all have, because we've been doing several events, since the crisis started, and people have been constantly asking about the trauma that's happening at home, and it's going to kind of build on itself until students are back at school, and then educators are going to be faced with supporting those students. So we really need to be doing the work right now too, I think. Really.
Yeah, definitely. And one of the things that I wanted to go back to on the data of the diversity baseline survey is that, I wanted to talk about what we did as Lee and Low, while seeing this gap. Like, we didn't only put this data out there, but we have like pushed for different initiatives inside our company. So like two things is that we have been many times the first publishing house for many authors and illustrators of color and of Native nations, and that we have 2 ongoing programs, and every year we have the New Voices Award and the New Visions Award. And the New Voices is for picture books by authors of color and Native nations, and New Visions is for YA and middle grade novels and graphic novels. And we are like a minority owned and operated company, and I think there shouldn't be like a problem kind of putting a data on what the makeup of your company looks like. And I think people are scared of having that conversation and showcasing that. Like, again, that's where being humble comes in, and be like, yeah, you know what, I think my company is super, like, there's too many women and it's too white or different, and be like, I want to do something, so yeah, I'm going to put a number on it. And I think people are scared of doing that. They think that they might get in trouble if that number gets out. Like, we all can see, like, it's not that much of a secret. And if you're taking steps to make that more diverse, then that will affect what arrives in children's backpacks, and what they take home, and what they're studying from.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, we have to acknowledge the problem in order to get anything done, right? I think so much of this is kind of created in silence in a lot of ways. And it just reminded me too of one of the resources I shared on there was Lambda Literary, and they support LGBTQ plus writers. So they also give awards to new LGBTQ plus writers, and offer fellowships and all kinds of programming just to highlight and give those writers a platform, and bring them into schools as well, bring those books into schools so that students can access them.
Yeah, definitely. And another way that we can have resources that elevate students' identities is like to look into what policies are in work in our workplaces and communities. And now that you and you're finishing your program there and Harvard, and you're launching into a new workplace, and everyone that is maybe moving works right now that are listening and are in the education world, like, I think reading into the about us, where we were saying yesterday, like, actually click on the about us section of who is in the company and what are their hopes. And if you really care about like equity and inclusion, like I think it's very basic to be aligned into what their mission and vision is, because that will kind of determine what kind of platform you have to actually make a change and make education more equitable. So yeah, I mean, what can you suggest now, moving into new workplaces? What have you seen?
Yeah, I think really asking intentional questions. I just had an interview yesterday actually, and I was asking them, it's an LGBTQ plus organization. I asked them, what's your commitment to racial justice and what does that actually look like? Because I think it's great to read the about us and to see that in the mission statement, and to really get examples of how they're doing the work is going to show you if they're truly committed to it, right? Because there might be a difference there between the words and the action. So I think, yeah, just asking some harder questions of the leadership is really can be really helpful.
Yeah, asking the hard questions is what is going to change the numbers and change the data, and what will make us, when we look, there's a lot of talk like what will things look like when we look back at the aftermath of COVID-19, and asking the hard questions will be what will change those numbers, because if we don't ask them, then we won't know and we won't be able to act on anything. And yeah, I mean, just going back to the mirror part, one example that I always share when I go to schools and I talk to district leaders is that when I joined Leonlo, my work for weeks was just reading books, which was amazing. I couldn't believe that was
I'm jealous.
the
That's
item in my agenda, like, pour a cup of coffee and like go through a pile of books. That was it. It was great. So I was kind of like just arrived to New York and like really enchanted with all the diversity and everything. Like growing up in Chile, it's a different type of diversity. It's even like you have a little bit more European descendant or like more native descendant, but that's kind of it. So I was like, on steroids here. And yeah, so I felt like I had a good understanding of how important it is to have a diverse representation. And I always share this example on the slides of this book. It's called Marisol McDonald Doesn't Match. And she's like a ginger girl and has like really brown skin, and her mom's from Peru and her dad is from Scotland, I think. And she anyway, long story short, like I read this book and I just started crying on my desk. And I cry a lot. Like you can in my office, I'm always like, jumping around and screaming. So like I've cried there many times, but this was my first time crying. And it was like, I just had never realized, I had traveled a lot. I grew up incredibly lucky. I traveled everywhere. Like I thought I had seen a lot. And like I realized that I just saw like a lot of windows more than mirrors. And it was just that feeling of like, I am not half Peruvian, half Scottish, but I am, Chilean, and my grandma is English, and now I'm married to an Egyptian Irish guy, and our daughter, God knows what is she? I don't know what her DNA exam would look like, but it was just that moment of like, I am Marisol, and like I haven't matched, and it took me like 27 years to see myself somewhere. And it was super emotional. And I always share that with schools, because it's like, you don't need to wait 27 years for someone to see themselves. And it wasn't like, if you saw the cover of the book, you think, but why do you relate to her? Like, you don't have orange hair. Like, that's exactly the point. The point is that the character of the book doesn't have to look like someone that you want to have an impact in, because it might, move them in different things. And then this little girl talks to their family on like FaceTime, and that's what I do, because we both live away from our family. So yeah.
That's so powerful. And it's what you said. It's like, imagine if young people could see representations of themselves even earlier, and what that would mean for their confidence and their development, and just so much. I was remembering too, when I was, I don't know, like 14 years old, and I would kind of like sneak to the television to watch Logo, which was the LGBTQ channel. And I had to secretly like find those resources. And I would also sneak into the Gender Sexuality Alliance in the town, neighboring us.
Right.
And that's very much a common story.
Right. Like incognito or whatever. Yeah.
Yeah. You have to kind of hide it and just find what you can. And I think that's a common experience for many young people of all different types of identities.
Yeah. And that is huge. It gives you like such a sense of pride, and like just to know that there's someone. So another call of what you were saying, especially before, like that LGBTQ plus youth that is feeling isolated, and that we might not have our support group in our homes or where we are in lockdown. Like I think the internet is a great place in that sense. Like we just need to know where to find, and that is why it's important to work with a mission, because that will always trickle down to the kids, and we need to foster all that complex grid of their identities, right? Like we need to, even if it's, we have, say, a bunch of books that are of kids that live in, they're based in California mostly, but that are the children of seasonal harvesters, and what does that look like? Like we need to expand like the range of books and topics and identities that we have, because we never know who is going to be affected and who will appreciate having that.
Yeah, getting more specific. And I think that speaks too to the graphs that you had about who's able to publish, because if we had more voices able to publish their work, we would have more of those stories, right? So it's kind of like a cycle. It
I
all
think
connects to each other.
it is completely related. Like it's not, we don't need to fight this fight just to be like, as we were talking, I don't know if it was yesterday or the day before, but you know, that we just the about us just for like the poster childs of each company. Like that doesn't have to be the only diverse, and we really need to question like, how is diversity, or how is the one diverse character of the book being portrayed? Because a lot of the times it's like, if someone is in a wheelchair, like that is diverse enough, you know, like, but what about the Latino people that are in wheelchairs? What about you know, like a Native Nations person that is in a wheelchair? Like that happens, that is normal. Like we need to we just published, we tend to publish like a diverse version of like a very popular book. So now we published a book, now it's 2018, I'm stuck in time, but it's called Benji, the Bad Day, and Me, and it's a mixed race boy that has a sibling with autism. So it's not even about the brother with, it's not about even about the character with autism, it's about the family dynamic when there is a child that has special necessities, and like it's about how left out he felt, and it's super own voices, that book, because the author, she has two sons and one has autism, but then she was also diagnosed in the spectrum after she published the book.
Oh, okay.
So it's important to have a lot of like kid-centered stories, and to foster, and going back to the trauma-informed list, like it's important to be asking the hard questions. And if you're in education and you're talking to, like, all of our hats off to all the teachers that are out there now, and talking constantly with their kids, like to try and find a space to ask, like, how are you doing? Like there's no, and that is going, we'll also share in our resource link a list of the social emotional learning books, but like the how are you doing piece is the first thing that you need to ask in times like this. Because if someone has something that is really affecting them, there's no math, no grammar, like no history lesson that's going to stick into anything if their person and if their needs are not met first.
Yeah, basic needs, food and mental health and all of that safety comes first, definitely. I was just thinking too, while you were talking of that story I told you about the librarian here in Cambridge who works with her students to evaluate all of the books that come into the library. And you shared that really cool resource with me from Lee and Lowe, just to look at how the narratives are being shared. Just reminded me from that book that you were describing.
So yeah, that's another thing, like how, if you want to diversify, like I'm happy to help, feel free to contact me, but there are a lot of resources and standards that you can guide yourself. You don't necessarily need to buy new books, you can just assess what you have. And the resource that we'll share in the link at the end is that it's called Classroom Library Questionnaire, but it's really like a cultural how culturally responsive your book collections are. And we've used it, you know, teachers have used it to assess what they have in order to get new books, or they have used it with their students so they can assess what they're reading. And just to take like a, you know, take the books and kind of see what the makeup of the books are and what the storylines represent, and what are we missing, and what is not being like accurately represented. And that is already a kickstart on feeling like, okay, what identity pieces am I missing here, and what would I like to see more? And that also helps bring diverse books which when I go to schools, like I see a lot of different situations on how the books are going to be brought into school. Like obviously my hope is that they are like treated the same as any other book, and they're in the guided reading sets, and they are in the classroom libraries, like across all of the categories, and hopefully they don't end up in like the diverse bin, you know, like the black and brown bin, which happens unfortunately. But no, at least the books are still going to be there. But we want to make sure that they're well used, right? So how to know if it's a good quality book or not. You can use assessment tools like that, and you can always count on, like, in, you know, the American Association of Libraries, like all these awards. Like if you are interested in a book that talks like accurately of the LGBTQ plus content, like look for the books that have the Stonewall Award like sticker on them. Like that will take you, you know, it's going to be great. And mentioning this, the Stonewall Award, we at Lee and Low got the Stonewall Award last year for When Aiden Became a Brother.
Oh, such a great book.
Yes, and it's like it's the right recognition, because again, like if you have, this is a perfect example because it's an African American family, and there's Aiden that identifies as a transgender boy, and like it's not about Aiden's transition, it's about Aiden becoming a brother. And again, like if you have a book, like a middle grade book about a boy that like wants to come out as gay, for example, and like that doesn't have to be the storyline. Like the book doesn't have to be about how this boy is going to come out. Like it just has to be about what it's a boy going through all the middle grade like problems, and like, you know, we fight with brothers, and like you have the annoying classmate, and like in this case of Aiden, it's he just wants to make sure that the new baby's baby shower is not as gender specific as he would have liked it, and instead of like it's a boy or it's a girl balloons, it's like celebrate that it's a baby, and why that means a lot for him, and then how supportive the parents are, and that's why it won the award, because you don't need to objectify like the diverse, you know, tendency of that the book has, like and it's good that he's Black, and there are Black transgender people, like surprise, you know, and they have to be represented.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's both your points, right? Like we don't have to consolidate someone into one piece of their identity. And then the other point too about trauma, like I think we need to be really careful too that the narratives that we're sharing aren't just traumatic narratives, especially thinking of Black young people and narratives that come into the classroom, right? We need to also be sharing stories of joy and celebration and family and love and all that good stuff too.
Absolutely. And that's huge. And thank you for bringing that up, because that's something very important of our mission as well, and what we publish. Like, yes, we have books of Black teenagers in like a rough urban area, but we also have, because that happens and we want to foster them, and we want them to be able to see themselves in a book. But we also have, you know, the rain is falling, and what time is it? And like sister, and like I want my own space, and just that's I think a good guideline, aside from like doing assessments, looking at the awards, like just as the Stonewall Award, look at for the Coretta Scott King Award, and like there's all this, the Pura Bel Pre Award for Latino books. Make sure that if there's a translation, that it's translated by someone that is a native speaker from that book, because if you, and we all know like that the school budgets are not infinite, like every dollar counts. So if you decide to buy one book and not the other, to use it for your Spanish lessons, like make sure that that Spanish doesn't make you go like, because that happens all the time. Like when with a few years that I taught here in New York, and I used Spanish resources, like a lot of the times the kids were like, what is this? And I'm like, I have no idea. Like, I just don't know. Like, I'm going to Google it just like you, because I don't know who translated this, or it might be like a too kind of like specific word that they use in a very specific place. And so like, make sure, look at the about us. Like it's going back to what we were talking before, like question things, like question the what's behind a book, question if you're reading the news now, like who is the editor behind this news, like question the sources, look at what's missing, and then what you can do to help it make it more equitable, and how that will trickle down.
And that's too where I would add that young people should be a part of the development of curriculum
Yeah.
and even books when possible, because they're the experts of their own experience. Maybe their development is different than ours, but they know who they are in many ways, and they know what their experience is, and they should be a part of those, you know, curriculums that are developed that are supposed to represent them, I think.
And
That's really
especially
powerful.
in the social emotional learning piece,
Mm-hmm.
because like now that I bring like these social emotional catalogs into schools, and some teachers that have been teaching for 40 years, they're like, this trend, and they just laugh about it, because since the beginning of time, like of course teachers have been trying for the kids to like emotions to be fostered, and now yes, it's trendy now, but we should always, it's always been a huge component, like to meet the emotional needs first. So to ask the question like, what do you think we're missing? Like, should I bring books that are about bringing empowerment and problem solving, or should we be talking about resilience, or what should we be fostering with our social emotional needs? And because that's the start of every process of education to work, I definitely think that children should take the lead on that, and like have and ask the hard question and make it anonymous, you know, like write a post-it and leave it in my desk, like no one will know, but then when you read the story, you know that you'll change that kid's life.
Mm-hmm. That's so funny because I get the same feedback when I go into schools talking
Mhm.
about social emotional learning or LGBTQ plus communities. And I think it's what you said, right? It's new language for things that we've always
Yeah.
been thinking about. And education is so, in the US, is so dependent on tradition and doing things the way
Yeah.
that we've learned to do them. And at the same time, there's so much creativity and expression that teachers bring into the classroom that
Mhm.
I think, you know, once you make the argument, it's pretty clear that that's what they've been doing all along. Right?
Yeah, that's what we've been doing. And but it's great that it's a trend now, because now we are creating specific lists and resources to help you navigate, because it's so broad. Again, it's like, oh, you need to get like SEL resources, and it's like, where do I even start? So again, like, ask. There are people like me that, you know, we work all the time to bring these resources in, and like we can help you navigate stuff. And again, like the like, folks that are part of the diversity and inclusion world, like we are happy to work off hours to help you
Yes.
to make it right, because once we see the shift of like, okay, there has been like more budget allocated to bringing diversity into the classrooms, and that shift, like you cannot have like a blind sight on that anymore, because it's just not allowed. Like people are asking for it, and if the budget is there, and if the resources are there, and there are more spaces in education, like this is why we're having this conversation today, because
Mm-hmm.
when the world is falling down, like what do we have to talk to is this, like this is what, you know, the invitation we got, and I'm honored that we have this space, because we just need to make the call. Like there's so much to do, there are so many gaps in the data, there are so many ways that we can reduce that gap. If you think that there is some part of you that can resonate with someone that is close to you, that you can call, that you can Zoom, that you can FaceTime and be like, that they can see a mirror, like especially now it's important, because we can't let that the all this Zooming and all this FaceTiming, like we are kind of getting used to it, but it really makes the natural connection, human touch, like proximity,
Mm-hmm.
um, make like it deletes so many mirrors, and where there weren't many to start with. So I think that that will be what will keep us going, really. And that
Absolutely.
will, yeah.
Yeah, and I'm going to hang on to that photo that you found of California and Wi-Fi access for folks, and just it's a reminder of something that we already knew, which is that zip code defines so much of what we're able to access in our lives.
Mhm.
And I'm going to push myself to think about that, because here in Cambridge, the schools are bringing hotspots to students and bringing,
Yeah.
you know, resources to their homes, but in the neighboring towns that might not be happening. And so how can we kind of stretch ourselves outside of the town that we're in, the community that we're in,
Yeah.
to support
And
students?
and it has been evolving so much through this pandemic. Like we saw a lot of companies like stepping in at the beginning with with free Wi-Fi, but then there's been so many obstacles on the way. Like
Yeah.
in New York City itself, I don't want to say the number, but the amount of, because I don't know it specifically, but the amount of students that live in shelters is humongous, like in the
Mhm.
hundreds of thousands number. And in shelters, there is normally a restriction on having Wi-Fi so that it's people don't see like as a permanent resident. So, you know, the iPad can be there. Maybe there's going to be a Chromebook, but what does access really look like? So I think, you know, just to respect everyone's time, but this is an open invitation to, like across every industry, country, wherever you are, to find those gaps and do something about it. If you have the extra resources, like now it's the time to share them and to print that activity for your neighbor's kid, or for the teacher that is teaching next door, because this is not only affecting students, but in that map of California, there's teachers that are living there too.
Yeah.
And they are the ones that are delivering. And it was yesterday, there was another note from the field talk with all these district leaders, and it was so empowering, and I think it was so hopeful to see everything that they're doing and how across school districts people are stepping up in different ways. Like, you know, the person that makes sure that the kids were safe crossing the road, like now they're delivering food, and
Mhm.
everyone is trying to keep the children going, and they will be forever affected. Like they will be the generation that were taking out of formal education during coronavirus, and it's up to everyone else to make sure that what that impact looks like. So I'm going to go ahead and reshare our screen.
Thank you. Yeah, thanks for catching the time. It's so fun talking to you that I lost
I
track
mean,
of time.
all our previous meetings have lasted like 4 hours because
Yeah.
we keep going. So I was very, very conscious of the time. So yeah, I mean, just to close, like we are all gatekeepers. We always talk about gatekeepers, about the people that are like high up there in the decision-making process, but we ourselves have the capacity to make decisions on what we share and what we don't. And we can all change the data, and we can all elevate students' voices. And yeah, we're gonna leave go ahead, Kimm.
Yeah, so we have compiled a list of resources from everything that we've talked about today. So if you go to bit.ly/elevate student identity, you might want to just type it in now while it's up here. It'll bring you to a list of resources that we've compiled, and you're welcome to check that out, and please share with anyone in your networks. And then our contact information is here. Like we said, we want to be resources to you, so please reach out if you have questions or want to chat about anything that came up in our conversation today.
Yes, and we will be resharing the link on our Twitter feeds, and then this recording will be up again if you ever want to come back and hear us talk.
Yeah, and you can check out, I think it'll be on Harvard Common Space's website, so check out their website and you should see the recording soon. Thank you all so much for being here, and Veronica, thanks so much for all of our conversations. It's been so fun.
For the invitation, Cassandra and Zach, back in the tech part of this, and thank you, Kimm. It's been super great working with you.
You too. Take care, everyone.
Bye.